The Senate voted to overturn President Trump's national emergency declaration, delivering a bipartisan rebuke for what lawmakers in both parties saw as executive overreach. Washington, a dozen Republicans joined Senate Democrats on Thursday to overturn President Trump's declaration of a national emergency at the southwestern border, arguing that the president had exceeded his powers in trying to build a border wall over Congress's objections. The 59-41 vote on a measure already approved by the House set up the first veto of Mr. Trump's presidency. It was not a big enough margin to override his promised veto, but Congress has now voted for the first time to block a presidential emergency declaration, and on one of the core promises that animated Mr. Trump's political rise. Never before has a president asked for funding, Congress has not provided it, and the president then has used the National Emergencies Act of 1976 to spend the money anyway, said Senator Lamar Alexander, Republican of Tennessee. Our nation's founders gave to Congress the power to approve all spending so that the president would not have too much power. This check on the executive is a crucial source of our freedom. It was the latest sign that the cautious Republican majority in the Senate, spurred on by a far bolder Democrat-controlled House, was beginning to reassert its authority with a president who had gone virtually unchecked during his first 2 years in office. Mr. Trump had sought to frame the vote publicly as not only a declaration of support for his border security policies but as a sign of personal loyalty. It's pure and simple, it's a vote for border security, it's a vote for no crime. Mr. Trump told reporters before the vote, which he had declared Thursday morning on Twitter to be a vote for Nancy Pelosi, crime, and the open border Democrats. But he could not overcome concerns among Republican senators about the legality of redirecting $3.6 billion from military construction projects toward the border wall, even after Congress explicitly rejected the funding request. I believe the use of emergency powers in this circumstance violates the Constitution, said Senator Jerry Moran, Republican of Kansas, in a statement written on lined paper. This continues our country down the path of all-powerful executive, something those who wrote the Constitution were fearful of. Ultimately, nearly a quarter of Senate Republicans joined Senate Democrats in supporting the House-passed resolution of disapproval. Roy Blunt of Missouri, Susan Collins of Maine, Mike Lee of Utah, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Rob Portman of Ohio, Mitt Romney of Utah, Marco Rubio of Florida, Patrick J. Toomey of Pennsylvania, Rand Paul of Kentucky, Roger Wicker of Mississippi, Mr. Alexander and Mr. Moran. The president tweeted that he was looking forward to vetoing the just-passed Democrat-inspired resolution which would open borders while increasing crime, drugs, and trafficking in our country. The House vote to override the upcoming veto is expected on March 26, according to a Democratic leadership aide, though it is unlikely that the chamber can muster the two-thirds vote majority. And Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, the Democratic leader, promised that would not be the end to it. Democrats will keep forcing repeat votes on the resolution. I believe the law allows us to bring it up every 6 months, he said, and certainly we would intend to do that. Regardless, the action in both chambers could bolster a number of lawsuits contesting the emergency declaration as a flagrant violation of the Constitution's separation of powers. The number of Republican defections underscored the turmoil within the Republican conference, where senators were torn between supporting Mr. Trump's vision for border security and asserting Congress's constitutional prerogative to dictate federal spending. Senator Tom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina and one of the first to publicly say he would support the resolution, announced he had changed his mind just minutes before the vote, to the disbelief of his colleagues, including Ms. Collins. He had been warned in recent days by North Carolina conservatives that he could face a primary challenger next year for his stand. He said conversations with the White House and his colleagues contributed to his changed vote. Other Republican senators agonized over their votes, as well. 3. Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, Ben Sasse of Nebraska and Ted Cruz of Texas, interrupted Mr. Trump's dinner with his wife, Melania, on Wednesday night at the White House to share their concerns about the constitutional precedent that Mr. Trump had established. Mr. Cruz initiated the meeting, hoping to sell the president on his own rewrite of the emergency declaration law that would restrict funding from military sources, according to a senior Republican aide with direct knowledge of the proposal. Mr. Trump summoned a lawyer from the White House counsel's office, who said the plan would strip the president of powers he currently possesses. "No way," an annoyed Mr. Trump told the trio, according to a person with knowledge of the exchange. In the end, all three men sided with Mr. Trump and voted against the resolution. Mr. Graham, along with other lawmakers supportive of the declaration, argued that the president's declaration was within the jurisdiction of the National Emergencies Act, and was needed to address what the president and his supporters deemed to be a crisis at the southwestern border. "I take Congress's prerogative over appropriations extremely seriously," said Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky and the majority leader. "But," he added, "the Senate should not be in the business of misusing specific resolutions to express opinions on more general matters." The outcome of the vote was as much a reflection of Mr. McConnell's ambivalence as Mr. Trump's insistence. The majority leader had strongly advised Mr. Trump against declaring the emergency declaration, and he made a point of not pressuring senators to support the president, urging them to vote according to their consciences and political interests, according to 7 Republican aides and lawmakers.